Hello, people. Andrew here, talking about comics from a reader, collector, speculator, investor point of view, in that order of importance to myself. And today I'm talking about a company called Crossgen and one of their first titles, Meridian. Okay, so Crossgen Comics. There was a tech startup guy by the name of Mark Alessi. And in 1986, he created a company called Technical Resource Connection Inc. with the idea of basically, it was to deal with technical staffing and consulting. So, as I say, he created this company in 1986, and in 1996, he sold it to Perot Systems, the Ross Perot of Perot Systems, for about $30 million. And it's to remember that this $30 million wasn't just a lump sum of $30 million cash. A lot of it was tied in with the Perot stocks, which will come back later. So in 1998, he decides that, okay, what's my next business venture going to be? And he looks towards comic books with the idea that he's going to create a company and create a bunch of intellectual properties. He's going to run the company like a business, and in about 6 or 7 years, he can start licensing the IP that they've developed for movies, television, video games, figurines, whatever. And then at that point in time, they'll all make oodles of money. That's the business model. So he approaches the idea, as I say, as a business, and creates a work environment down in Tampa, in Florida, with salaried employees, including benefits and all of the things that come with being a salaried employee, including a sort of a 9 to 5 work zone and work ethic that he employs. He's not sure about exactly what comics are all about, so he actually hires some three top talents to help develop the world, the Sigil verse. He gets Mark Wade, Barbara Kessel, and Ron Mars to develop Sigil verse. And before they even release a comic book, they spend a couple of years, or a year and a half, 2 years, developing Sigil verse and what's it's all going to be about. The idea of the company called CrossGen is because they decided that they were going to make stories that aren't necessarily universal, but they cross generations. Things to do more with folklore and themes that are present in all generations, and stories that can be told across all generations. That's why I say the cross gen. So the idea with the sigil verse is that there are these beings that give certain people powers upon various planets. The main objective as to why they did this and where they're going with that, that's not as important or as explored as the people that receive these gifts. Meridian being one of them, incidentally, receiving these gifts. I'll get into that in a minute. So the company does well in the beginning. It, as I say, hires salaried employees, and which is something new to a lot of the freelance writers and artists that have been involved in comic book. Everything has been always not exactly paycheck to paycheck, but you don't know exactly where your next, paycheck is coming from. You don't know what your next project is going to be. But here you're a salaried employee with all of the benefits that come with it. And for a while there, it was very good. The first four titles that CrossGen released, Meridian, Mystic, Sojourn, was it, and Scion? No, it was Sigil and Scion. Sojourn was a little bit later. So once again, I'm going to give you those four titles again. It was Scion, Mystic, Meridian, and Sigil. So these titles did fairly well. They had some top talent behind it. Meridian was written by Barbara Kessel and illustrated by Joshua Middleton. And people responded well to it, and it got some accolades, got some nominations for some of the comic book awards. They were doing well. Things did start to unravel as time went on. It was a clash of cultures. The whole salaried employee coming into 9 to 5, working on these sort of things, while it sounded very good to a number of writers and creators, it also created some bitterness between them, because I don't know how they worked as a freelance, but perhaps the idea over a period of time of showing up for work 9 to 5 is not exactly what they're looking to do. And it kind of, I don't want to draw today. I was going to take today off to go fishing or whatever it was. I don't know what exactly happened, but I know that there were some bitter feelings and some loud voices and anger between both Mark Alessi and the most one that you read about a lot is Mark Wade, but amongst some of the others. It wasn't all a bad environment. Part of it actually encouraged some of the writers and artists to improve, especially the artists, because artists would post their work, and others in the Tampa building would they look around and say, "Ooh, that's amazing. I really like that." And another artist would be saying, I want these people to say, "Ooh, I like that about my artwork." So they up their game and they learn tricks from one another and how to, you make this look like it's moving this way or that way, and so they would borrow from one another and learn from one another. So as I say, it was a good environment, but it started to turn sour when personalities started to clash. I know there's a whole story about how Mark Alessi's wife was dragged into this as being catcalled and given bad names and what have you. I don't know how much truth there is to that and how extensive it was. I just know that there was bad blood between corporate and the creative. So that was not very good an environment. Other things happened to make the wheels start to come off on this. Now, unfortunately, Mark Alessi's wife died of, I think it was a heart attack. I think might have been cancer. I'm not sure, but she died very early on into Crossgen's development, and that put obviously a strain on Mark Alessi and soured his opinion of things and put him in a bit of a depressed state to a certain extent. And so there was that going on in his own personal life as far as the comic books were concerned. Well, the comic book market had shrunk by this point in time. 10 years ago it was really booming and there was all kinds of things, but that dropped off in the later part of the 90s or the mid 90s. So there weren't as many people buying as many comic books by the time Crossgen was floating around. So the four titles were doing well, but then they started to expand, and as they expanded, they had to hire more people. And as they hired more people, that means a larger salary, larger money, and if a book failed, and you've got a salaried employee, now you've got to create another book so that he or she has something to work on. So they overextended themselves a little bit or overexpanded their market and what they thought that they would get. I mean, just because I liked Meridian would not mean that I would go and buy some of these other new titles. Barbara Kessel referred to all of these titles as sort of evergreen because they do have themes that are spread out across every generation. And they tried to do that with some different themed books. There was a horror book. There was there was a book about pirates at one point in time. They had mysticism, science fiction. This is really more like fantasy book. This Meridian story. But they figured that all kinds of people that were buying these books originally, they would flock or buy more of the other books, and this just didn't happen. They just kept producing more and more titles, but having less and less returns. The business plan was always to go about 6 or 7 years without making a profit, using the $30 million kitty to fund it, and then make the money as licensing came in. That's a business plan. I don't necessarily think that's a great business plan because there's no guarantee that the properties that you're creating are going to be that effective that people are going to want to license them. But nonetheless, this is the plan that went forward. Unfortunately, as I said, a number of things, clash of cultures, the death of Mark Alessi's wife, and then the Perot stocks tank in 2003, and they lose a huge chunk of their value, about like 73 to 80% of their value. And all of a sudden, this $30 million is pretty much wiped out, and they find themselves in financial difficulty. I can't say. I mean, some say that checks bounce, some say that they don't. But there was financial difficulty in keeping all of these books around, and it got to be too much, and the company had to file for bankruptcy in 2004. And just before they did that, though, Disney stepped in and bought the entire company, the entire line, for $1 million. So this is where CrossGen ended up, is in Disney's hand, and they didn't know what to do with the property. They were sort of Some believe that they were just buying this company to learn about the comic book industry before they went ahead with possibly buying Marvel, which is what they ended up doing, was buying Marvel. So Crossgen actually fell into Marvel's hands, and in 2010, Marvel released a number of books with the CrossGen logo based on the stories from CrossGen, but unfortunately the time had passed and the interest had waned, and it's possible too that the books themselves were not all that sharp or all that good, and it was just after a few issues of a couple of titles, that was the end of CrossGen. Are we going to see any more cross-gen books through Marvel, through Disney? Maybe, but right now they're just sort of sitting in a dustbin, and there's been no further stories, which is unfortunate because there were some good stories and good characters, and now they're just lying in limbo. All right, so that's the story of cross-gen itself. What about the story of Meridian? What's it about? Well, as I say, there's these sigils that are given to people, and in this case, in Meridian's case, it's supposed to be given to two brothers. One is the minister of Meridian, and the other is the minister of Catador. Unfortunately, the minister of Meridian dies before he can get the sigil, and it is instead imprinted upon his daughter, Sephi. This is Sephi here. Still the her Uncle Island is the other one that receives the sigil. So the difference between the two, between Meridian and Catador, Meridian is more of your working class type of island or land or whatever you want to call it. This is a fantasy land where there's a lot of the islands float above the prime planet itself. And Meridian is one of these. Is a chain of floating islands, and there's shipbuilders, and there's ships that float on the air. So they're workers, and whereas over in Catador, they're more of merchants and tradesmen. So the conflict and the main thrust of this story is that Sephi is just received this power. She's now the minister of Meridian. She's a very young girl. I think she's 16 at the point of the start of the story, and she has to learn all of these things. She has to learn about her new power. She has to learn how to be the minister. She has to learn about the political situation. So it's basically following her journey. Now, her uncle, who and initially she trusts because he's an uncle, he's the villain of the piece. His idea is that he wants to control Meridian. He sees an opportunity now that Sephi's in here and she doesn't know what she's doing, is to control Meridian and control all of the trade and be a highfalutin merchant and have control over the whole land. And he doesn't care who gets in his way, and he doesn't care about necessarily the people involved. He's there for power, his power, and he'll stomp on anybody to get there, and he'll try and do this covertly, and he'll say sweet things to Sephi, but in the background he'll be trying to kill her and eliminate her, and steal her power and steal her position. So the journey is Meridian, I should say Sephi in Meridian, learning all of this as time goes on, and then how to deal with this situation. It is an evergreen story where you have the one corporate evil, and you have the one land-based or people-based good, and this is what the story is about, and it's all in the telling and all in the artwork. The artwork, originally the first 6 issues it's by Joshua Middleton, but apparently he had some nasty things to say about the company, and he said it in the social platform, in the social medium, and he was fired because of it. So starting in about issue number 7, Steve McNiven takes over the artwork. And then there are some other fill-in artists along the way, but these are the main ones. I mean, we got Vincenzo Cuca and Luke Ross. They do some of the stuff in the later issues. There's a couple of fill-in issues as well. June Brigham, I think, does a couple of fill-in issues. But basically, you're looking at Joshua Middleton for the first 6, and then Steve McNiven for much of the rest. It went for 44 issues. I haven't got the final issue, so I don't know if they closed off the storyline or not. Because a lot of the storylines from Crossgen, because the company just abruptly stopped in 2004, many of the storylines that they had been working on or developed, they just stopped. There was no follow-up. It just came to an end. I'm not sure if Meridian did that or not because I'm missing the last two issues, which I will hunt, which were probably some of the harder issues to find just because they were the last two and probably not as much production. There wasn't a number of counts. So I'm going to go through some of these covers here. So the question is, did I like the story? Well, as I say, that was issue number one. It's another nice piece of artwork by Joshua Middleton. Um, I liked the artwork. Obviously, elevates it and is part of the story. It gives it that fantasy flavor. It's all in the telling of the story of this young girl as she navigates her way through all of these challenges. And there are some additional characters that are brought in additional situations. But basically, Sephi is a developed character and a developing character. Her uncle, what is his name was Elon or Ilan, Elon perhaps. He's more of that one-dimensional kind of villain, snarky, like rubbing his hands together and saying, "I'll get you, my pretties," type of thing. But he develops a little bit and understands his powers to a certain extent. But he's more of the one-dimensional type of villain, and it's really Sephi's journey that we're watching or following, and some of the characters that are involved in her life. And it's a good journey. Kept me interested. It wasn't static. She moved from place to place, visiting different people, and she genuinely learned things and changed in ways to learn about her powers, what she can do, to learn what it means to be a leader, not just of forces opposed to her uncle, but also to be a leader of Meridian. And I did enjoy her journey. I thought it was interesting. It's worth a read more than once. And once I finally get the last couple of issues, I will probably sit down and read this entire series from 1 to 44. So, yes, I do recommend Meridian. What about for a collector? What are you going to do for a collector? Well, a collector, you're going to collect it for Meridian. You might want to buy the whole Crossgen line, which is probably, I don't know, 200-300 books, maybe a bit more. Maybe it's more than that. You might be interested in the artwork by Joshua Middleton and Steve McNiven. They do some good stuff. Or, following the work of Barbara Kessel. I think more than anything, though, it'll just be because you're buying Meridian. The artwork might trigger you, but it's pretty much buying it for Meridian. As far as speculation is concerned, well, this is speculation and investment on this book. There's the first issue features Sephi and her uncle. And there are other issues throughout that show introduce some other characters. But until Sephi becomes noteworthy or people are noticing her as the original character, until the value of her first appearance goes up in any way, shape, or form, I can't say anything for the other secondary characters. And especially if the book is never going to see the light of day again, which would be unfortunate, then no, there's no other key issues to speculate on other than the first one, which introduces Sephi. And that one you can still find in a dollar bin. You might have to pay more for it here or there, depending on where you're going, but most of this material can be found in the dollar bin. So I would find a copy of issue number 1 if I was speculating. I would also find some of those issues just because I'd want to take a look at the artwork. I'd like to read the story. That's primarily why you're going to be picking up Meridian, not because you're expecting any kind of financial windfall. So I wouldn't, as far as investment, even if I had a really sharp number 1 copy, and I do, I'm not going to get it graded. You'd pay far more to get it graded than the book is actually worth, even if you were to grade it in a 9.8. There's just not a lot of demand for this book. It'd be nice, as I say, if it came back, if people became interested in it, and hopefully by me talking a little bit about it, you might be interested in it and pick it up in the dollar bin. But it's seeing as a key issue, but it's not a key issue. Um, and that's how it could become alive again, as if people were taking an active interest in this book. But that's not happening now. So find yourself a copy of number one in a dollar bin or in a cheapy bin or whatever, and buy that. But by all means, read the story. They are collected in trade paperbacks and omnibuses and what have you. So if you get a chance, read some of Meridian. I like the series. I recommend the series. Well, that's about it for me today. Thanks for listening. And as always, be good to yourself and be good to others. And, we'll talk again later.